All right, welcome everyone to this third meeting of the Removal Fill Fees Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Thanks everyone for joining. And just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and a couple folks are still joining, so welcome all. I'm Sylvia Chubroski, helping to facilitate this process. And I'll just go over our agenda and purpose, and then we can dive in for the day. So today we're going to revisit what we talked about last time on the wetland determination and delineation proposed fees at the beginning of the meeting, and then dive into Division 89. And then we're going to have some RAC discussion on Division 89 and then dive into the fiscal impact statement and the racial equity statement, kind of like we did at the last meeting as well. And then we'll have time towards the end of the meeting for interested parties to make any comments, and then also just talk about next steps before we end at around 11 o'clock. As we get into the meeting, just a few reminders on just our Zoom protocols and meeting guidelines. When we get into our discussion periods, we encourage you all to raise your hand to get in the conversation. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on reactions, you'll find your hand button, raised hand button. And if you're on the phone, which I don't think anyone is, press *9 to get in the queue. And we did have an issue with a RAC member being on mute on the phone last time, which we weren't able to address. So sorry about that. And I think if you press *6 on the phone, that'll help with that. I'll remind folks of that if you're on the phone at a future meeting. And as we have our conversation today, I encourage you to keep your mic muted to reduce background noise, but then please use video if you can when you're speaking, especially so that we can kind of pretend we're in a room together. And we just ask that you all, do your good guidelines of speaking with respect and listening to different points of view as we have our conversations. And we thank any members of the public and staff that have joined today. If you are not a RAC member or one of the core planning staff from DSL, we just ask you to stay in listening mode throughout the meeting. And members of the public will have a chance towards the end to make a comment. We have a 10-minute public comment period towards the end of the meeting. All right, let's go into the next slide, and I'll just cover what we're really here for today. So two key purposes of today's meeting. One is we are going to go back to at our last RAC meeting, you all discussed the fees and tiers for wetland determinations and wetland delineation reports. And you also had some additional questions on that topic. So Danielle and the team have a few more pieces of information to provide today to respond to some of your questions, and just some new information to provide. And we also just want to get a little bit more clarity from the group on some of the questions you had so that the team can be responsive. So we'll have that conversation. And then most of the meeting, we are focusing on the new topic, which is the fees for general authorizations. So you should have gotten that in your meeting packet, kind of the rules and the proposed fees for general authorization. So the team will go through what are general authorizations, how do they work, what are the proposed fees for those, what do the rules look like, and then we'll have a discussion with you on the fee and the rules and get your input. And then we'll also have time towards the end of the meeting to talk through what could be the fiscal impacts and racial equity impacts of the fees for general authorizations. And we'll kind of continue to update the worksheets that we started last week with your thoughts on fiscal and racial equity impacts. So that's what we have on the agenda for today and our meeting purpose. Let's maybe take the slides down for a second. I'll just do a quick round the room to see who's here and make sure RAC members get a chance to say hello. So I'll go to our RAC members, and I'll start with Brad and then Chris, if you want to just say hello.
Good morning, everybody. Brad Livingston, Statewide Wetlands Program Coordinator from ODOT.
Thank you. And Chris Gannon, are you here? And we weren't able to hear you. This is also a great time to test the mic, so make sure we don't have trouble later. Still not able to hear you, so maybe we can
Hello?
try to troubleshoot that up. Oh, are you calling for, go ahead, Chris.
I'm just an observer.
Oh,
Under
okay.
4230, George Donnerberg.
Okay, thanks, George. All right. Well, Chris, maybe we can troubleshoot with you offline. Okay. And then let's go to John and then Katie.
John Van Staveren with Pacific Habitat Services.
Katie Ryan with the Wetlands Conservancy. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you. And Lauren,
Hi, I'm Lauren Poor, Oregon Farm Bureau.
welcome. And then let's go to Michael and then Natalie.
Michael Martin, League of Oregon Cities.
Welcome.
Natalie Janney with Multitech Engineering.
Welcome, Natalie. And then Peggy and Stephanie.
Good morning, everyone. I just want you to know, I actually did my homework from your last meeting. Sorry I missed you. Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon.
Thank you, Peggy. All right. Did I miss any rulemaking advisory committee members?
I'm still here.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Stephanie Pulvers with the Oregon Association of Counties. There we go.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Good morning, Sylvia. I'm Chris Gannon, Crooked River Watershed Council.
Great. We were able to hear you. Thanks, Chris.
And Efren Zamudio with the Oregon School Boards Association.
Thank you, Efren. All right. And we'll have staff say hello when they make their presentations later today. Thanks, RAC members, for being here. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Danielle to walk through the follow-up on Division 90, the wetland determinations and delineation. So go ahead, Danielle.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Danielle Boudreau, DSL Rulemaking Coordinator and stand-in data person for this rulemaking project. So we have some news about this data that we've been working on. When I was going back and looking at the weighting of how much the wetland delineation determination fees accounted for in the revenues, and the estimated revenues, I discovered that for the lowest revenues, we actually had some errors in our calculations, in our estimated revenue calculations. So what we were presenting at 50% is actually at 60%. So the fees themselves that we've presented you haven't changed. It's just that the cost recovery estimation has. And so you'll see that reflected in today's information. And we've also gone ahead and changed the 70 to 73%. We had been rounding down. So I decided to show you. So we're at 60%, 73%, 85, and 100. So that way you can see there's a 12 to 13% increase at each cost recovery model. So again, the fees have not changed. What we're proposing as the fees, just how I was calculating the estimated revenues in one of my spreadsheets had an error. And so that changed that cost recovery percentage. Are there any, and I double checked all of my other data and all of my other data was fine. It was just this in this one place where I had some errors on what was being calculated. Are there any questions on that before we move forward? No, okay. We just wanted to make sure that you were aware of it. You're going to see some new percentages, but again, those fees have not changed. So we talked about Division 90 last meeting, and we talked about the tiers and those fees. And what we were wondering is if the RAC was comfortable giving a recommendation as to where to start with our initial fees, or if this was something that you wanted to wait until like our last meeting to talk about, like, we've looked at everything. We would want to start off at 60% for everything. So we're kind of looking at that. Lauren.
Were you able to put this next to and do a percentage increase for us so I could see? Because I would struggle to make a recommendation if I don't know.
Okay.
So for my members, the 73%, 850 on tier 1, that's a X% increase for my member.
Okay.
I mean, I
Okay.
can't make the recommendation without knowing what I'm actually
No,
for my members, what it is, like, because that's what it is for them on the ground, like it's X% increase from what they're currently paying. Because that's
Yes.
what the real life application is for them.
Yes. No, that's an excellent recommendation for data for us to provide, and an excellent segue into like we wanted to ask at the end of our next slide, but we can ask now, is what data you want to see and why you want to see that. Because I was able to put together some like weighting percentage, which I think is one thing that was asked for the last meeting, but other data I wasn't able to put together because I was out last week and I didn't want to have something rushed and for y'all. So I'm hoping to have some more data to present to you before the next meeting by next week. So what I'm hearing is one thing that we would like to see is the percentage increase from the current fees. So like, for instance, I'm showing you what the fees are now, but it's more helpful to see what that increase is at each cost recovery level, correct?
Yeah, because that's what the impact is for a real person that's actually paying these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. And I did want to point out too that the current fee is now listed at the bottom of this slide, Lauren, but it sounds like having the percentage increase in the table would be the same, would be more helpful.
Yeah, my math isn't that great. I can't just run it in my head. So I think like being able to see what the fee increase is from a percentage is helpful for them at each of the tiers.
Okay. Yes, thank you. That is helpful to hear.
Okay, do you want to keep going, Danielle?
Yeah, so I didn't know if there was anybody else who wanted to voice whether or not they wanted to wait on their recommendation, or go ahead and make a recommendation now that we can move forward with. And again, we don't have to have a final recommendation at this meeting. It's more so just finding out what everybody's comfortable with. And it's kind of why we wanted to revisit this, is to just kind of touch on that and be more clear. Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I would appreciate doing at the end. I just want to make sure that, in sort of coordinating this between, my technical advisory group and folks that I'm working with, our members, that I have a better understanding of that before making a decision, if that works. So I'd vote put it at the end.
Okay.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks, Michael. And others, any other thoughts? And just to clarify, with going into this meeting, we were planning to ask you all to maybe make a recommendation on what should the cost recovery percentage be for wetland determinations themselves. But now we're thinking it makes more sense to show all of the proposed fees for each of the pieces of the program, and then ask you all to make a recommendation on the cost recovery percentages after you've been able to kind of get the benefit of seeing all that. So that's kind of the question now, is would you rather really focus on wetland determinations by themselves, or just look at everything together and talk about that more later? Natalie?
I think maybe the engineer in me is still hung up on the fact that these percentages don't match like a percentage of the 100%. So I think that is challenging for me.
So one thing I did do, and I want to put together a table for this, and I think I was understanding what you were asking, Natalie, but I might be off the mark, is this last bullet here is when you look at the total program cost recovery, the wetland revenues account for 20% of that total program cost recovery. So of the 60% that we're looking at, 20% of that is the wetlands revenues. And I want to put together a table that has this all across, that has these numbers across the board. But again, I didn't want to rush something since I was going to be out of town last week. But is that what you were looking for?
I think whatever you're using as the basis for determining the fees, and I mean, it's not as much an issue, I think, for this fee, because this is a smaller fee than in terms of like the general authorization fee, but whatever you're using, I'd like to be able to see kind of how the math and the assumptions played out. Because in my mind, if like it should all be linearly related, and it's not mathing out that way. So if you could put, I appreciate you not wanting to rush it, but that would be helpful for me to see is the overall math and how it's being done. I think that chart would help me.
Okay. I'll see what I can put together that isn't overly complicated.
Well, I'm an engineer, so complicated is
Okay.
probably not too bad.
Okay.
Right,
Peggy.
thank you, Natalie and
Oh,
Peggy.
sorry.
Thank you. And I really did listen to the last conversation at the last meeting, because it's really important for me to make sure that the first level of determinations in that part of things, I do not want to discourage people from getting that beginning information before they really need to get to a permit stage. And so I want to make sure that we don't increase the costs to actually get the original information. And so that's really important. The other thing is, you heard me, heard in my email, I am not interested in 100%, but I am interested in listening to everybody who actually pays these fees as to what's a fair percentage. But I really want to focus on that first part. I want to make sure we don't discourage the beginning stage of learning about wetlands. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Peggy. And Chris?
Right, thank you. I think this question is for Danielle. I want to go back just a little bit, Danielle, please. The table you still have up, when you say that second bullet, 20% of the total program cost recovery, but you have 4 different values in the table. So which, I'm guessing it applies to one of those?
It's 20% at all of them. So when I did the calculations, it was, that $370,300 was 20% of the total estimated revenues, and the same with the other ones. So at each cost recovery level, it was the same percentage of revenues of that total estimated revenues.
Did that answer the question, Chris?
No, but you know what? I'm okay with it for now. I think I'll wait to see that larger table that was requested by Natalie. That might solve part of my question.
Yeah, so I'll have a separate table with those percentages. I mean, some of them were like 19.5%, some were 19.7%, so rounded, it was 20%, around 20% for all of those.
Okay, thank you. And Natalie, did you have another question or comment?
It's not fully formed, so I'm gonna hold off.
Okay. Okay, that's helpful. Any other comments or thoughts on, it sounded like from those who spoke up that you'd rather wait to make a recommendation on the cost recovery model until later. Would anybody rather have that discussion now? Okay. And I think the other thing we want to do here is just really clarify additional information or data that you all want and sort of the why behind it. I mean, I'm hearing from Natalie and from others that just better understanding the math, even if it's a complicated spreadsheet or something, would be helpful. And then maybe getting a little bit at the why behind that would be helpful, so that Danielle and the team can make sure they're putting together in a way that responds to what you're really asking for and kind of why it's important. So maybe Natalie, I'll go back to you a little bit and get a little bit more at the why, so that, so that the information is presented in a way that's helpful. Yeah, so, and Natalie, do you have any other thoughts on kind of the why?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know you meant right now. I think overall, the more transparency about why decisions are being made, and how the values are being, established is beneficial for helping, people in the industry. I mean, no one's decreasing their fees, everyone's increasing their fees. And so the more transparency and understanding, and I think it needs to make sense, like the way I'm interpreting these values, they are not proportionate to each other. And so if I'm not interpreting it correct, I think everyone needs to feel like the value is the correct value. And I'm not saying that it's not, I don't understand it. And so I think more understanding about how the value came to be helps everyone feel like that is the right number. And yeah, I think just transparency. I think it's better when agencies who charge fees for services are transparent about it.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Peggy, for your confirmation there. Okay, anything else that would be helpful to folks in terms of information about the wetland delineation and determination fees specifically that you would want to see? Okay. And Danielle and staff, any other questions back to the RAC?
No, I think I have my marching orders on what data to present. And hopefully I can present things in a clear and concise but detailed manner.
All right, great. Well, thank you. And if anything comes up for folks, just, let us know later in the meeting. Okay, well, I think with that, we're going to move into the next piece of rules, which is the Division 89 General Authorization. So this is Team Danielle and Russ Clausen will present some background information on general authorizations, kind of how the fee was calculated, and then we'll have time for plenty of RAC discussion on the fees and the rules. So I'll hand it over to Danielle and Russ.
And I'll hand it over to Russ because he has the beginning part of this.
Good morning, folks. Russ Clausen, Department of State Lands and Remove Fill Specialist. So general authorizations are a category of authorizations that are pre-approved in rule, and it's then we determine whether they're eligible or not. And the criteria for being able to even set them up is they have to be substantially similar in nature. They only cause minimal individual and cumulative environmental impacts, and they don't result in long-term harm to water resources of the state. So either a light touch or restoration type touch is basically what they are. Go ahead, Danielle. There's 7 types of general authorizations, and we'll just kind of scroll through these here a little bit. There's minimal disturbance, and that has allows for investigative drilling that gets used a lot by folks who are putting in bridges and etc. Scientific measurement, surveys for historical resources, and maintenance reconstruction of in-water structures. That's a lot of like outfalls. And then beaver pond levelers and exclusion devices. Overwater structures, this is docks and piling, and then dolphins. So water-related overwater structures that are for mostly boats, and also allows removal of old piling. So navigational aids and docks, that's kind of what most of this one's about. We get a lot of those. Next slide. Temporary impacts to wetlands and waterways activity. This is a lot used a lot by utilities, where they come in and trench and then put the pipe in and then restore the site. And it allows up to ½ an acre of temporary impacts in non-tidal waters and 0.2 in tidal waters. And then it also allows the work in the waterway for isolation if they have to cross a stream or something like that. Next slide. Waterway bank stabilization using bioengineering activities. So this is, well, you can see bank terracing, sloping, reshaping, and placement of large wood and log toe placement. So it's kind of the softer touch for stream bank stabilization, using kind of environmental focused stabilization techniques. Next slide. And waterway habitat improvement activities. There's a number there. It's barrier removal, grade control, fish wildlife passage, screening structures, porous weirs, and replacing culverts and tide gates for fish passage. And then there's habitat logs, beaver dam analogs, and post-assisted log structures. So these are basically stream improvement activities. And then wetland ecosystem improvement activities. So this is similar to the stream one, just for wetlands. So contouring and reestablishing wetland functions and just restoring sites is what this is focused on. Next slide. And then we have one for placer mining. It's for non-motorized placer mining, and it's a limited number of streams that can be used on, and that we don't get a lot of those anymore. Next slide. And then there are also, similar to the GAs, there's 3 exemptions that also require a notice, and it's just a similar review process. In fact, these 3 are also in the GA packet that we send out, application packet that we sent out, and they're usually connected with a general authorization. Next slide. And those activities are ditch and drain tile removal, placement of large wood boulders and spawning gravels, and activities customarily associated with habitat restoration in essential salmonid habitat. The last 2 are the ones that get used the most. All right, and as far as the process, the department receives the notification, and occasionally there's a fee with that, and that's logged in by our support staff, and then they notify the coordinator that they have notification to review, and then the aquatic resource coordinator has 30 days to review it to determine eligibility or not. Next slide. And then and completeness on that last bullet there. And then ARCs, if there's some small things that might be needed, the ARCs may interact with the applicant and say, hey, can you get me this drawing? Or there may be some small interacting there. And then the ARCs draft the determination of eligibility or ineligibility, and they forward that on to support staff for issuing that letter. And then the GA is approved is valid for 3 years after that. Just on mine, Danielle.
I can take this one. It doesn't matter.
Okay, I'll just do it. So there is a $250 currently. There's $250 flat fee for 2 types of activities if they're over 50 cubic yards. And the first one is the overwater structures. That's back to the docks, the pilings. I don't know that we've gotten many of those, probably few or none, because it's hard to get over 50 cubic yards with those types of activities. The temporary impacts to wetlands and waterways, that would be the one where we've had some fees because they were over 50 cubic yards. And this is just a summary of the number of general authorization types by type. And you'll notice that the overwater structures is overwhelmingly gets used the most. And then the exempt notifications are also on there as well. I'll give you a chance to kind of scan through those. Okay, next slide. And this is the current revenues based on the general authorizations we get. Next slide. All right.
And this is where I take over, Russ.
Yep.
So I'm going to talk about the determination of the fee for the general authorizations. So HB 2238 states that the department shall establish a fee based on the cost of processing the general authorization, which is different than the wetland delineation reports and the removal fill permits, which require a tiered fee structure. So that's why you only see one fee when we're talking about general authorizations. And to determine that fee, we use the staff time tracking data. And it was established that the average processing time of a GA notification is 2.8 hours. And the average time per notification was then multiplied by the cost of each staff position associated with processing a notification. And that's where we got our kind of our base to start off from. And as you see, this is what we're proposing, coming in at 60% for submission. We're talking at $300. And what this is, and the biggest change with this now is it's going to be all GAs are going to have a fee associated with submission. Whereas now you can see that there's a fee of $250 for only 2 types of GAs. And like Russ mentioned before, those have to be 50 cubic yards or more. So now it's because we're going by what the HB 2238 directs us to, and looking at the cost of processing a submission. And here's our estimated revenue based on the yes, Lauren.
So on under 50 cubic yards, you weren't charging before?
Correct. For any GA that wasn't an overwater structure or a temporary impact, there was no charge, and then there was no charge if there was under 50 cubic yards for those 2 GAs.
And then so my other question on the so the other question I have on it as it relates to this, does this have any impact at all on the ag exemption permit that goes through ODA that we have now with you guys in ODA?
That is something Russ will have to answer.
No, that would not. Yeah, those aren't connected.
Okay, so I didn't know if there still was a connection with you guys on that one for dry ditch cleaning. Okay.
Right, we're not receiving those applications.
Okay.
And maybe for the benefit of the group, can you say again what that was?
So there's a program through Oregon Department of Ag that we had worked on with you guys to do an exemption for dry ditch cleaning. And it used to go through DSL, but now it's through ODA, but that's just for dry ditches. But I didn't know if this would somehow affect that it doesn't have a fee on it, so.
All right, thank you. And let's go to Peggy.
So Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters. So this is one of the areas where I want to remind people that sometimes there is a public good. And so I want to be cautious in increasing these kinds of fees related to the overweight of public good versus many removal fill permits, which end up being a monetary positive for the business or whatever. And so I just as we look at all fees, that's part of what we look at is it a general Oregonian public good to do this work versus collecting a fee for the work? So, and just want to raise that issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. And Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, please just quick clarification. Danielle, when you said all GAs in the future will be subject to a fee, did that include those conservation type projects? There was a long list that in the past were less than 50 cubic yards and therefore didn't have a fee perhaps? I'm just trying to make sure I connect the dots correctly. Yes.
Yes. So we were directed by HB2238 to collect a basic processing fee for all GAs.
And maybe go a little further. The current fee at 250 reflects that 2.8 hours roughly, or is maybe just a little short of that. And that's why we got to this 300.
Yeah, the 250 is not covering the processing.
Does the 300 cover the minimal processing fee at the lowest end possible? And that's why we start at 60% on the table?
I believe it's a little less. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's been a little while since I've looked at that spreadsheet.
Okay.
But I believe one of the goals that they had was to try to keep these fees low, since there is, as Peggy was saying, greater good for these. So they wanted to keep them as low as we could.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. And Lauren?
So for the ones that are under 50 cubic yards, do they actually have to file a permit to do that, or isn't there an exemption?
They submit a notification for the GA, which I think Russ can talk more about that as to what that notification accomplishes.
Yeah, I mean it makes sure that we can find out whether it's eligible or not. So it has to fit certain criteria. There's certain thresholds, there's certain types of activities, etc., that the general authorization allows. And so we verify that it fits those. It's kind of a combination of a checkbox system with actual drawings, etc., that kind of show the project. So it's pretty simplistic, but it has enough information that we can make sure it's eligible. So yes.
Might just add, Russ, I think because we do have a 50 cubic yard exemption, that may be where the confusion's coming in. So it's, if you notice, the ones, many of them talked about essential salmon habitat. So the threshold for removal fill in a stream that's been designated as essential salmon habitat is 0 normally. So if it's more than 0, these GAs are creating a way that you don't have to go through a individual permit process if they meet these activities, even if it's over 0 threshold. Does that help?
Yeah, so I guess my question is, if you have the exemption, are they filing anything with you, or are they just doing their work? And
so for the general authorization, are the exemption specifically?
Yeah, so if they're so I guess I'm just verifying that if I have a farmer who is cleaning one of their ditches, it's under 50 cubic yards, are they notifying you at all and then having to pay this, or are they just doing the work?
Well, I'm not sure all the time, but these general authorizations and those 3 exemptions I pointed out weren't really focused on that. That would be a different issue, but for the general authorizations and exemptions, if they think they qualify, then they would submit a notification.
That's where my concern is. I would have to raise a big red flag about having to all of a sudden pay $300 to file a notice of an exemption, because that is hugely expensive for my farmers to do every year. When you think about their miles and miles of ditches, and they're only being able to clean 50 cubic yards every year anyway of a wet ditch, and now they have to pay $300 every year to just file a notice of exemption. That's why I'm trying to clarify if that's what we're talking about here.
No, we're not looking to change that that process.
So they wouldn't have to file a notice to clean their exempted 50. That, I mean, that's just what I'm trying to clarify.
Go ahead, Danny. You were going to say something.
Oh, yeah, if it's outright exempt in the removal fill law, rules, it's below the thresholds, it doesn't fall into needing anything. There's no change. It's an outright exemption. We don't typically see anything. I think what Russ was presenting earlier is that there are 3 exemptions for voluntary habitat activities that were specified, that in rule we do require notice for those, but those are I don't think the ones you're thinking of, Lauren, for agricultural exemptions.
Okay, that's just what I wanted to clarify, because when we went from 0 to 300, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't like a notice that was now being required. That was all.
No, thanks for asking. Yeah.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thanks for clarifying. Peggy?
Yeah, that was really good conversation, Lauren. So I want to make sure that people understand that some of these notifications, even if they're not a fee related, are helpful not just for the agency, but for the general public who worries about wetlands. And if they can then check with DSL and they find out that DSL has been notified, but it's not a big deal in what's happening, that's also helpful for the general public to have that information.
All right, thanks, Peggy. All right, do you want to keep going, Danielle? And I think we have a few more slides and then we'll open it up to more discussion.
So again, we have our estimated revenue based on the cost recovery percentage. And these revenues represent only 2.3% of the program cost recovery at each level. So you can see it's even though we are increasing our fees for this, these are not a huge impact to that total cost recovery. Okay. Any other questions about the proposed fees? No. Okay. So I just want to, these are the same slides you saw a couple weeks ago about the proposed rule language, and that the draft rule language includes placeholders for fees. And the reason for that is we're asking the RAC for a recommendation for a cost recovery proposal to use as the initial fees. And then we're proposing an annual fee increase of 5% in order to keep up with economic growth. And before CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was used as the measure to increase the fees annually. That was in statute. It's no longer in statute, and we can't use CPI in rule. But for the past 5 years, it's been a 4.26% increase. So we feel that the 5% is in line with what's been going on in the past few years.
And Peggy, did you have a question on this one?
I do have a comment about the 5%. So for a number of years, DEQ has been able to use a 3% annual increase just so that they at least gradually increase the fees, and then they have to come back every few years and get a larger increase. The 5% does make more sense. And I want to remind people about one more thing. The CPI talks about a larger set of numbers, whereas state government is so heavily weighted towards staff costs that the 5%, again, the 5% makes sense because it really is a larger increase than the CPI usually when you're dealing with this information. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy.
Okay. And then that brings us into discussion of the fees and the rule language. So I'm gonna switch over to the fees to see if there's any more discussion about that.
All right, thanks, Danielle. Yeah, and I think what we really want to focus on here is if you have any just input on the fees themselves that are here in the table, and then later we can also go back into the rule language and have a discussion on the words on the page. But kind of any input on the proposed fees here. And this again, as Danielle described, is a little bit simpler than what you've seen before. We don't have the tiers. So it's really just the one fee without the tiered structure. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, this is going to sound terribly selfish. I'll just admit to that. But for the practitioners in Oregon that are implementing conservation projects, to benefit fish and wildlife habitat, and given the 2.3% impact to the budget, as we saw on that slide, thanks, Danielle. I'd like to propose that there's some additional thinking at the staff level on a way to accommodate that narrow band of projects in Oregon, so that really they either pay a flat, I don't know, say $100, $50, something along those lines, or maybe some sort of exemption against the fees. Again, I would only propose that knowing that the impact overall would be pretty negligible for those specific kinds of projects. I think there were 15 or so. Maybe when you add the 2 columns, it maybe was 22, but not a lot of those projects per se that are going through permitting. So that's my proposal, I guess, consideration. Thank you.
Okay. And Chris, can you repeat again which of the projects were those? I think I might have missed that.
Well, there were a couple of tables back where we had the different project types. So some were over waterways, I think, some were, I'm pretty sure it was the permit types that we were looking at.
So I think you're talking about the wetland habitat improvement and the waterway habitat improvement GAs.
I think that's correct, Russ.
Specifically,
Yes, thank you.
because
I
the other
believe
ones
that's
all
right.
have the other ones all have an element of use associated. The docks want to be marinas and private dock owners and things like that.
Right. Thank you, Russ. This was the one I was referring to. So the second column over, habitat improvement, and then I suppose I could lump ecosystem improvement in there. You get about 20 total. And I guess I'm just suggesting for the group's consideration that those specific types of projects arguably have the highest public benefit in Oregon, and therefore really might warrant some additional thinking about how to reduce their costs even further. For every dollar we put into a permit fee, application fee, review fee, any of those kinds of things is one less dollar that we can put into a log structure, for example. So just asking for that consideration.
Okay. Thanks,
The
Chris.
habitat improvement would be the waterway, and the ecosystem improvement is the wetland, for what that's worth.
Yeah, and Michael, I see your hand up, but I just want to stay on this comment for a little bit just to see what other RAC members think so we don't lose the thread. So it sounds like Chris is proposing maybe a lower fee for the habitat improvement and ecosystem improvement type projects. And I wonder if others have additional thoughts on that, if it seems like it would be a good idea. Brad and Peggy, I both saw you with a thumbs up. And Lauren, did you have a comment on this one?
I do have a little thought just because, and not that I don't like the projects. I do worry sometimes because when eventually the projects wash out or whatever, if they wash out downstream and then my members maybe have to clean some of the debris out of the system, they have to then pay a fee, these fees at the higher cost to remove it out of the system. And we're not getting a discount to do that. And so it's more cost to our members. And we've been told, well, you can find out whose project it was that washed out and then try to recover from them, but you can't really do that. That's not really how it works in real life. And so these costs then eventually come back to landowners downstream the woody debris makes it down the system and there's no discount for us to remove it when we have to pay those fees. So it's another cost to our members at the full price.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Lauren, for that consideration. Maybe any other thoughts or from staff on how to deal with that concern, if you've seen that happen in practice, and if there's any relief for Lauren's members, not Lauren's members, but the members you're referring to.
Are you specifically concerned about large woody debris? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, the large woody debris eventually does make its way down system from wherever it's coming from, projects, nature, you know, and it gets in irrigation systems, wherever, and they're cleaning it out, whether it be my members, whether it be April's irrigation district members. I mean, it's there, and then they pay removal fill permits to clean it out. So
there is an exemption that allows, you know, it's threatening property or structures, that allows that material to be removed without a permit.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Okay, well, any other thoughts on kind of a lower fee for these habitat and ecosystem improvement type projects?
I'll just go on record as saying that, you know, as a Wetlands Conservancy, I would agree with Chris on that. And again, the public good and the importance of those restoration projects. So just want to make sure to get that on record.
Thank you. Okay. All right, then Martin.
Michael has his hand up. You might not be able to see him.
Oh, sorry, who does?
Michael Martin.
Oh, yes, I know. I was just waiting to finish out this conversation before we start another one, but thank you for pointing that out. It's always helpful to get more help because it can sometimes be hard to see all the hands. All right, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just kind of, to your question before we had this, you know, sidebar and follow through, I appreciate the following through on a question that was raised. But for myself, I want to reemphasize something that Lauren said, is really seeing the percentage fee increase like laid out, like, you know, for this, like I don't know, this one's a little easier, but I'm not super quick on the math myself either, but it's like, I think this is a 20, 40 and a 60 and an 80% fee increase. So certainly seeing that reflected in the documents is helpful to understand.
Okay, that's great. That's helpful. So just kind of wanting to see more of those percentages laid out in the materials that go out to the group. Does that sound doable, Danielle and team?
Yes.
That would only be applicable to the overwater structures and the temporary impacts, because the others don't have a fee.
well, wouldn't it, that's still an increase though. It's 100 or, I mean, it's a significant increase for those people.
Okay, thanks. So it might not be a clean chart, I think is what Russ is saying, because there's different, it's not kind of, yeah, it's not an exact, not everyone pays the fee today, but that's helpful to know.
300 times 0 is 0. Is that what you're saying, Sylvia?
Yeah, right. Someone do the math there. I'm not doing it. It's not my department. Okay, great. All right, well, any other input on the fees themselves here?
Danielle, I just wondered, could you go back to the bill language? I just want to make sure with some of the ideas. Oh, and you stopped sharing. For some of the suggestions that we've seen, I just wanted to look at the language in the bill to make sure we're aligned with if we wanted to pursue that. Does that, you know what I'm talking about?
Yes. Let me just find that slide real quick.
Because we had originally outlined some tiers that did give some discounts for beneficial projects. Then we had to toss that when Russ realized, well, the language in the bill doesn't allow for that. So I want to make sure we set expectations given this. And specifically whether we can separate out some of the GAs and charge a different price than the others.
So I will say, based on what I remember when we were doing the staff time tracking and we were looking at tiers, is the habitat restoration projects actually took a lot more time to process than the other GAs. And so if we were to go on the cost of processing for those habitat improvement projects, it would actually be significantly higher if we were looking at recouping the processing fee.
Ouch.
Maybe we could dig in a little bit with staff. I don't know if there was enough notes to understand maybe why those, is there a reason those are taking longer, something we could address a different way, but maybe that's homework for us. I'm not sure why those results were the way they were.
And it may be that I need to take out the high and low outliers.
Yeah, maybe let's dig into it just a little bit. I just given the language, I didn't, because like I said, that was our original intent and we had to back away from that. So we may have to find just a different approach to see if we can address those comments that were made earlier. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Yeah, and thanks for the reminder that the House bill language does sort of, provide the framework for what can happen with the rules and the fees too. Peggy?
And I guess that's where I was going in reading what's on the screen. And I was a part of 2238, but I don't have it memorized. Thank you. It doesn't say it has to be the same fee. It doesn't have to say any of that. So I guess I would take a second look and ask staff to make sure that they're interpreting the language of 2238 correctly, and that it has to be the same fee, etc.
Thanks, Peggy.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. All right. All right, well, if there's not any other comments on fees, we could move into the rule language. But I'll give it one more second to see if there were any other thoughts on the fees themselves. All right, then let's go into the rule language if you want to pull that up, Danielle. And as that's up on the screen, I'll just maybe remind folks that on the slides, that it was also indicated that these dollar amounts have X's because we're looking for a recommendation from the RAC on the cost recovery percentage, but we're also going to delay that cost recovery percentage conversation until you've had a chance to look at everything together. But you'll also notice that this is laid out as 5 years worth of fees, and Danielle stated earlier that the recommendation is to do a 5% increase for each of these years, so that would be reflected in these rules. So we'll see if there are additional comments on that idea of the 5% increase per year, which Peggy, you provided some comments on that earlier, so thank you. So comments on the 5% increase per year and just anything else on the words here. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, right. Thank you. So I guess I'm fine with the 5% increase. And I think the intent here would be to plug those 5% escalators in to real numbers so that the rule actually has the real numbers projected over that 5-year period. But I want to clarify the first number 1 point. The new language suggests that there are no state permit for voluntary. So I'm a little confused by that, given we
Those
just
are
talked about.
those are the exempt notifications. That's what we refer to them.
Is that the same language then that you might be able to replace with exempted permits or something like that? Exempted
It might be worth
activities?
to have the reference back to Division 85.
Yeah, that's just a little confusing, that language right there. Thank you, Daniel. That was my only point. Appreciate it.
Okay. Helpful, thank you. Others. And if you scroll down, is there a lot more language here?
No,
Yeah,
it's
a pretty short one. Okay.
yeah.
And maybe going back to the 5%, I mean, I've heard sounds good from a few folks here. And I think at the last meeting also heard that mostly sounded okay, but wanted to see if there were any other comments on the 5% increase per year.
Oh, I can't resist, but I really want to say that it's better for business. It's better for people who do business to have some stability in knowing that their fees are going to be increased by a certain amount. It causes less heartburn as we have to adjust fees in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks, Peggy. Okay. Well, any other comments from folks on the rules here? Danielle or staff, any more specific questions you have for the RAC or any clarifications you want to hear?
I don't have any. The rule language for this rule is pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I think, oh, go ahead, Dana.
I was saying no, I think the only thing I would add maybe for the group before we wrap up is just that we are tracking folks' suggestions, and we are working on those behind the scenes, and we will bring them back to you. I know there were several suggestions from the first the last RAC meeting, I guess, was number 2 on the wetland delineations and things that we are working on. So just wanted to assure people while you haven't seen a response yet, we will be bringing that to you and are trying to flag those down and see if we wanted to propose changing anything. So we'll do that at a later meeting.
That's great. All right, thank you, Dana. Always nice to see that feedback loop, so that'll be helpful in future meetings. And Brad, I see your comment in the chat about exempting fees from agencies with liaisons. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? I think this would be the appropriate time to bring that up.
Yeah, I think that's our primary concern or feedback from ODOT is that because we're funding a liaison, we should be exempt from the fees when you consider the price we're paying per project is probably far in exceedance of whatever the resulting fees will be.
All right.
To follow up with that one, so is there a mechanism for a credit because you're paying for a staffer? Does it make the rule more complicated? Sorry, folks.
Is that a question for me? I'll let DSL go.
For staff or you, Brad, whichever one. I'm addressing your comment because I think it's important to listen to what everybody has to say. And you're paying for a staffer. We're paying, the state of Oregon is paying for a staffer to help ODOT with their processes. So what I'm hearing from you is because of that, why should we also be paying the same fee as others pay who don't have liaisons? And I'm just trying to address that and listen to the staff or whomever.
Yeah, I think Dana or Russ.
Yeah, I think one of the things.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Dana.
I was just, Peggy, clarification. I think I heard you say, is there a possibility of a credit? And I wasn't sure what you were thinking there. Okay, well, however we would account for that ODOT is paying for services. Thank you. Russ, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things to look at is a comparison to what is being paid relative to what the costs would be for some of these. I'm not sure exactly how they compare. So the proposed fees as opposed to what has been charged liaison. So that'd be an interesting piece to look at.
So the bottom line is Oregonians pay for, Oregonians taxes help pay for all of this stuff or private industry helps pay for this stuff. I just want to try to be fair.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have brought this up, Brad, to folks, and so it is something we are considering. And I believe there's a interagency agreement between ODOT and DSL that could reflect or be updated if fees were raising for the public. And as Russ was saying, we might just want to revisit the amount and make sure that we're being equitable. But I think it is something that the management is interested in pursuing. So
Great, thank you. Thanks, Brad. Okay, any other comments on the rules? Great, okay. With that, I think we can move into our next couple of topics, which are the fiscal impact statement and the racial equity statement. So Danielle, over to you for some context there.
Okay. So again, same slide that you saw a couple weeks ago. These two statements are required by the notice of proposed rulemaking. The fiscal impact statement is intended to identify the fiscal impact of the proposed rules on affected parties, including government agencies and small businesses. The racial equity statement is intended to identify the effect of the proposed rules to racial equity within the state of Oregon. And today's discussion will provide input on the drafting of these two statements. And we will discuss a housing impact statement at a future meeting, most likely not the next meeting, but the meeting after. And I'll prepare a worksheet to send out as soon as possible for that. And the housing impact statement is required for some agencies by statute, but not DSL. But we are voluntarily going to do a housing impact statement since this does impact housing within the state. And we'll start with the fiscal impact statement. And last time we identified some units of local government that would be affected, and then some members of the public. I don't know if if anyone had any further time to kind of ruminate on this and said, and then based on our discussion with Brad, I'm going to say that we should add ODOT here as they would be impacted by these changes.
Great, thank you. And maybe, do you mind zooming in just a tiny bit, Danielle, on that one? And just, I think most of you all were here at the last meeting, but just a reminder that these worksheets were sent out in advance, and essentially Danielle is just writing in your comments cumulatively from all of the meetings so that the team can then go back and draft the fiscal impact statement based on the input that we're hearing kind of at the meetings cumulatively from you all. So today, if you have any comments on any of the questions in the worksheet, like who is impacted, if any members of the public are likely to be impacted, any thoughts you have on small business impacts, cost of compliance. I think were there a couple more topics here?
Just those.
Perfect. Yeah. So just any additional thoughts you have on those, and it could be related to the general authorizations, but I think any other pieces of the rules as well, since it will be one cumulative fiscal impact statement. All right, Chris, go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Right there, Danielle, where your cursor is, I might suggest adding ODOT or other state agencies who fund liaison positions, or agencies who fund conservation projects, because I think for all the reasons Peggy already listed, I think those are definitely going to be sort of downstream impacts to those users of the permit system. So again, draft language, you probably have to massage that and make it sound a little better, but something we could review later and either approve or disapprove. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thanks, Chris. And Peggy?
So I was just going to say ODF and W, Chris sort of put it in a larger context, but I would think that ODF and W might have some of these projects that they are funding, and I don't know about OWEB.
OWEB for sure. Big funder of a lot of our work.
Great, thank you. Lauren?
Members of the public, obviously agricultural landowners are going to be impacted by this.
Thanks, Lauren. Anything else on kind of who would be impacted?
April's not on the call, but I imagine, and they're quasi-public entities, irrigation districts probably as well.
And you're saying quasi-public, so I should.
They're quasi-public, they are taxing districts.
Okay, so.
They're not a state agency, so they're local government.
Okay, up here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lauren. Okay, and maybe can you scroll down just a little bit on the cost of compliance question? So maybe we'll see if folks have any thoughts on economic impacts on state agencies, government and members of the public, or how small businesses might be impacted. Maybe if there's anything you listed some of the groups that would be affected. Is there anything you want to say about the types of impacts? Probably can't do a monetary impact right now off the top of your head, but just anything generally you want to say about that? All right, well, we can keep working on this as we have future conversations. And then let's spend a minute on the racial impact statement as well. Do you want to pull that up, Danielle? Maybe Danielle, do you want to kind of run through those questions again, just at a high level?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
So for the racial equity impact statement, we're looking at, what groups and people are subject to the rule, what issues are addressed, which racial groups are likely to be most concerned, if any, and what could be the impact on those racial groups. So any thoughts on those questions from folks? There's also a question here about what data would be helpful to determine racial equity impacts. Maybe is there anything that you all think could be helpful? Yeah, Peggy?
Do we have somebody online here who's a part of our tribes? Because I do wonder whether or not there is an impact, or because there could be an impact, particularly as their importance, they feel importance to water, whether or not there is some nexus there. That's one group I can think of.
We did extend invites to the 9 federally recognized tribes, but we did not have anybody reply that they would like to join. But thank you, Peggy, for bringing that up.
I did think on the first call there was someone from the Klamath tribes here, because I did follow up with her afterwards.
Okay, yes, she did attend the first one, but I never heard back from her as to whether or not she wanted to be a RAC member or just be kept apprised of things. Yeah.
I know that they were gone for culture camp for much of the month. So that, yeah, I don't know, might be worth reaching back out.
Okay. And it sounds like generally might just be helpful to dig into whether there could be a specific impact on tribes.
Danielle, quick process question. Do we provide the racial equity statement and the other statements to the tribes as part of our process?
No, no, that's not part of our process. And I can also consult with Gary, who's our state archaeologist, as to whether or not these would have significant impacts.
Okay. Great. Do you want to scroll down a little bit, Danielle, to the bottom questions too? Just pause to see if folks have any thoughts on the questions on the screen here. All right, well, we'll keep revisiting these worksheets at the future meetings. And I think I would also probably say if folks, have some written ideas that you want to provide to any of these questions, sometimes it can be hard to respond on the spot or you need a little more thinking time. I think feel free to send those over too, and we can kind of have those for the next meeting and discuss with the group. All right, I think that's it then for the fiscal and impacts and racial equity impact statements. All right, we're going to move into our interested party comments. But before we do, just want to do one last call, see if RAC members, if anything else occurred to you in terms of input on the rules or any other questions you have. Yeah, Peggy.
Sorry, I just found my notes. In the racial equity statement, I guess the other issue is what is the cost to access the data? And for low income people or perhaps others, as a part of the racial equity statement, is there a cost to access the data, and is that an issue? So that's the only thing I had in my notes from last meeting that I listened to. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Peggy.
Where about would that comment go in here?
I don't know. I just know that it is an issue, particularly when we're talking racial equity in all of our conversations is the cost, particularly for low income individuals. And I realize that that's not necessarily specifically racial, but that is a big issue as to whether or not there is a cost to be participants, a cost to be a part of. And so I'm not really sure where it belongs, and I apologize.
Okay, thanks, Peggy. All right, well, I will turn it over now to the public comment. If you don't mind putting that slide back up. All right, so I'll just see if there's any members of the public that want to make a comment today. If you do, just go ahead and raise your hand, which is under the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. I don't think there's anyone here by phone. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so I think we'll skip the comment period today, but of course, welcome more interested party comments at future meetings, and thanks to interested parties that joined today. Okay, well, we're about to get to our wrap up. So Danielle, I'll hand it over to you for next steps.
Okay. So following this meeting, any revisions to draft rule language and proposed fee will be sent to the RAC members. It seems like the only revision to the rule language would be to add a reference to Division 85 when talking about the no state permits for voluntary habitat restoration. And that will be sent out to the RAC members, along with a meeting summary and today's meeting reporting, which will be posted. And prior to the next meeting, which we'll be talking about individual, general, and emergency permits, also being referred to as divisions 85 and 93. We'll send an agenda to the RAC. And as always, we'll post all of the meeting materials on our rulemaking webpage, which are where the links that Sylvia provides in those emails, which that's where those are located. So, and we keep all of our meeting information up there available to everybody in the public. So if you know of anybody who wants to refer back to anything, feel free to send them to our proposed rulemaking page. And all of that material is kept up throughout the rulemaking process and 2 years after the rules are adopted. So that's what's happening next. Any questions? No? Okay.
Well, thank you, Danielle. And thank you to all RAC members and staff. We will see you at our next meeting on September 11th. So see you then. Take care.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.